Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. In the heart of a bustling city, nestled amongst the clamor and chaos, stood an old abandoned mansion. It was a relic of the past, a silent sentinel watching over the changing times from its perch on the edge of town. Despite being forsaken by its former owners decades ago, the house was strangely well maintained. The paint on its walls, though chipped and faded, was still regularly touched up. The lawn was mowed and the hedges trimmed, the windows cleaned. All of this was done by Adele, a simple gardener who tended to the grounds of the mansion. He was a solitary man in his late 50s, his face etched with the lines of a life well lived, his hands gnarled and strong from years of working the land. Adele was all that stood between the mansion and the encroaching wilderness, ensuring that nature didn't reclaim what humans had abandoned. He had been doing this for over 20 years now, ever since he was hired by the absent heirs to maintain the garden. The garden was truly a sight to behold, a vast expanse of green, dotted with ancient trees and adorned with exotic flowers and shrubs. It was a place where sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground in emerald and gold. Birds sang merrily from their perches, and butterflies danced gracefully from bloom to bloom. There was a timeless quality to the garden, a sense of continuity that belied the mansion's desolate state. At the center of the garden stood a broken stone fountain, its water feature long dry, its basin filled with fallen leaves and overgrown ivy. The fountain was a prominent fixture in the garden, yet it held a certain mystery, a silent allure that drew Adele to it every day. Something about the weathered stone and the tangle of vines growing around it fascinated him. He would often sit by the fountain during his breaks, lost in thought, dreaming of the days when the mansion was alive with laughter and the fountain sang with the sound of running water. One summer night, as Adele watered the plants near the fountain, he felt a warm breath on the back of his neck. He turned quickly, his heart pounding, but saw nothing. Yet a moment later, a soft whisper drifted through the leaves of the ancient oak tree above him. "Why are you late?" The voice was like the tinkling of a tiny bell, sweet, musical, and utterly ethereal. Startled, Adele jumped, knocking over the watering can. He looked around, but could see nothing in the gathering darkness, except for the twisted branches of the oak tree swaying gently in the breeze. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of his aging ears. Perhaps it was the work of a night owl, a curious cat, or a restless spirit playing a prank on him. As the days passed, however, the voice continued to call to him. Every evening at dusk, as the shadows lengthened and the air grew cool, Adele would hear the voice whispering his name, beckoning him to come closer. He found himself drawn to the sound, unable to resist its gentle call. And so each night he would sit by the fountain and listen, and then he started seeing her. One night, as Adele sat by the fountain, he saw a movement in the shadows cast by the oak tree. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but then the movement came again, taking shape in the darkness. It was a woman. She stepped out of the shadows and stood before him, her form as elusive and ethereal as smoke. Her long, flowing black hair cascaded down her shoulders like a silken waterfall, and her eyes glittered like stars in the night sky. Her skin was as pale as moonlight, and her lips were red as blood. She moved with an otherworldly grace that made Adele's heart skip a beat. For a moment they simply stared at each other, Adele frozen with surprise and awe, and the woman with an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Then she spoke in a voice that was like the rustling of leaves. "Why are you late?" she asked, her gaze fixed on Adele. Adele stammered, unable to speak. He wanted to ask who she was, how she came to be there, but the words caught in his throat and no sound came out. The woman tilted her head, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Do you not recognize me, Adele?" she asked softly. "We met before, long ago," she added, her voice trailing off like the last notes of a distant melody. Adele shook his head, his confusion growing. He knew he had never seen her before, yet there was something about her voice, something in the way she looked at him that tugged at his memory, stirring feelings he couldn't quite place. The woman sighed, a wisp of air that stirred the leaves around them. "It has been so long," she murmured more to herself than to Adele. "So much has happened, so much has changed." She paused, her gaze drifting to the old fountain behind Adele. "Yet some things remain the same," she said softly. As the nights passed, the woman became a regular visitor to Adele by the fountain. She would appear from the shadows of the oak tree and stand beside him as he worked, her presence both comforting and mysterious. She never revealed her name, but Adele came to know her as the woman of the fountain. She told him stories of the garden in its glory days, of the laughter and love that once filled the mansion, and of the tragedy that had struck it down. Her voice was filled with longing and regret as she spoke, and Adele found himself drawn into her tale, feeling her pain and sorrow as if they were his own. He learned that she had been a resident of the mansion, the mistress of the house, and that the tragedy she spoke of was the murder of the mansion's master, a wealthy nobleman who had met a gruesome end in the garden all those years ago. The killer had been caught, a jealous rival who had sought to inherit the fortune, but the true motive had never been uncovered. As the days turned into weeks, Adele's feelings for the woman of the fountain grew. He found himself looking forward to their nightly meetings, to hearing her voice and listening to her stories. He yearned to know more about her, to help her find peace. But as the full moon approached, he also grew more fearful. For the woman of the fountain was not of this world, and as the moon waxed, her visits became more frequent and intense. She would appear more often during the day, and at night she would wrap her icy fingers around his, holding him close and whispering in his ear about the garden, about the mansion, about the love they shared, about the love he had for her. Then one night, as the full moon bathed the garden in its silvery light, the woman of the fountain finally revealed herself to Adele fully. She took his hand in hers, her touch colder than ice, and led him to the base of the old oak tree. Looking into his eyes, her gaze intense and unwavering, she whispered, "I am yours, Adele. I have waited so long for you to come to me. Now you are mine forever." Before Adele could respond, she pressed her lips against his, and the world spun around him. He felt a surge of power course through his veins, and then everything went black. When Adele woke up the next morning, he was alone. The sun was streaming through the leaves of the oak tree, and the garden was filled with the sound of birdsong. He sat up, his head pounding, and looked around. Where was the woman of the fountain? Had it all been a dream? He got up and walked to the fountain, hoping to find some answers there, but it was as though she had vanished into thin air. There was no sign of her anywhere. Frantic, Adele searched the garden, calling out her name, but there was no reply. He checked the mansion, but it was empty, as it had been for so many years. Desperate for answers, he went to the neighbors, but they only shook their heads, their faces etched with pity. "She is gone," they said, "but we warned you not to trust her. She is a dangerous creature, a Jinni who preys on the lonely and the lovelorn." Adele refused to believe them, though. He knew in his heart that the woman of the fountain loved him. She had shown him, hadn't she? But as the days turned into weeks and the woman of the fountain made no appearance, doubt began to creep into Adele's heart. Had he been wrong? Was she really a dangerous creature who had used him for her own purposes? Or had she simply moved on, leaving him behind in the garden? Adele never found the answers he sought. The woman of the fountain never returned, and the garden, once the setting of their romance, became a place of sorrow and solitude once more. They say that sometimes at night, when the moon is full and the wind is just right, you can hear the laughter of a woman echoing through the trees, the sound of a fountain trickling over ancient stones. And if you listen closely, You might just make out the whisper of a sad, haunting melody carried on the breeze. Some say the garden has grown unnaturally lush, bursting with blooms that stay fresh for weeks. Others claim to see the shadow of a man wandering among the trees, holding the hand of a woman with burning eyes. They say that if you venture into the garden at night, you might just catch a glimpse of the woman of the fountain and hear the echo of her sad, haunting song. A song of lost love, of a broken heart, and of a soul that refuses to rest.